Good morning to you. I hope you're well this morning. It's good to see you. We have come to a passage in 2 Corinthians 6, which we have to think carefully about it. It's from verse 14 to the end of the chapter, even to verse 1 of chapter 7. And it says in my Revised Standard Version, "Do not be mismated with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness and iniquity, or what fellowship has light with darkness? What accord has Christ with Belial, or what has a believer in common with an unbeliever? What agreement has the temple of God with idols? For we are the temple of the living God." Do not be mismated. Now, it's interesting that my Good News Bible says, "Do not try to work together as equals with unbelievers, for it cannot be done." Now, it's interesting. If we take it in its context, we look back just a few verses to the beginning of chapter 6, and most of chapter 5, which is all about working with God. God being in the world, reconciling people to himself, and us having a task of reconciliation and working together with him. Chapter 6, verse 1, working with God. Then he comes to this place where he says, do not be mismated, or do not work together with unbelievers. Those few verses with all those questions in it are good for us to think about, because we have, on the one hand, the need to be part of this world, to know people and have friends, to associate with people who don't know Jesus. Otherwise, how will they ever come to know him? Because the instruction of the previous few verses in chapter 5 is all about being an ambassador to people. And an ambassador doesn't sit there mute. You actually have to relate to the person that you're talking to in order to plead with them God's cause. But it's interesting that the word used in the original means unequally yoked. And the picture here, and I think that's where the Good News Bible has caught the sense of it, working alongside with somebody. Two animals yoked together. They did not yoke unequal animals together. They didn't yoke a male and a female animal, for example. They did not yoke a horse with an ox. They yoked together equal animals, because if they weren't equal, they would pull in one direction or the other, because one would be stronger than the other. So when you yoked two animals together, you needed to yoke matching animals, as it were, animals that were similar in kind and in ability. Otherwise the work would not get done. And this is the picture that he's using here, of being yoked. We are to do the work for the Lord, but it's very difficult in this world if we have tied ourselves very closely in our life to someone or to people who are not believers. It is very, very difficult. It makes for difficulties that God never meant us to experience. So this applies to the deepest of relationships, marriage, living in the same house with somebody. If we live in the same house with somebody who does not agree with us, who is an unbeliever, and every time we go anywhere, do anything Christian, there is a tension. It's not easy. It makes it really difficult to follow the Lord properly. It's about what is the most important thing in your life. Is it following Jesus, or is it sharing a home with this particular person? We have to be careful not to have really deep, close associations in our lives with those who don't share our values. And this is because it just makes it much, much more difficult to follow the Lord. I mean, Paul, even in 1 Corinthians, we looked at it, didn't we, in our earlier thinking. He talks about how difficult it is for two believers who love the Lord, who get married, to be able to follow the Lord wholeheartedly, because they have, along with their commitment to God, a commitment to another person. And part of their time is spent trying to please the person they're living with. And for Paul's mind, it's better not to marry, even marry someone who loves the Lord, because of the tension that will, and the two pulls on your time and affections and direction. So Paul has been saying that we need to work with God, to work with God, working together with him. Verse 1 of chapter 6, working together with him, working in tandem, working in a yoke with God. We do his work. But if we tie ourselves very closely to people who don't know the Lord, then it's very difficult. If we mustn't take our advice from someone who doesn't love the Lord. We must take our advice from the scriptures. So think about these things. They're very real and very deep, and it's one of the hardest things to talk to someone about when they're very affectionately tied to people. It's in your family, for example. If you're in your family and your family don't agree with what you do. I had this when I was growing up. My mother particularly did not want me reading my Bible, and she would do everything she could to stop me doing that. And being a Christian in my parents' home was extraordinarily difficult. And every time I went to church, every time I did anything, I went to a meeting, every time I talked about the things that were important to me, it made a tense situation even more tense. And Paul, quite rightly here, counsels us to be careful about those whom we have, whom we tie ourselves to. Think about the yoke. The yoke of the two animals is a very close association. It's not talking about two animals just in the field together. There's no problem there. They can interact and so on, and there's no tension, really. They can stay the other side of the field if they want to, and occasionally chat. And I think that's a bit like a picture of the relationship we have with most of the people who are not saved in our world. We meet them occasionally, we chat with them, we maybe spend an afternoon with them, but we don't commit ourselves to serious work or serious activity for God with them, because it wouldn't work. So here's something to really think about. Think about those questions in 2 Corinthians 6:14 to 16. And if you are tied to someone who is not a believer, just think about these. Think about how God's love for you is that he wouldn't have chosen those tensions for you to live with every day. That would not have been his first choice for you. Think about it. If you disagree with me, I'm sorry. And if I've upset any of you, I'm sorry. But the scriptures are wise in their advice to us, and we do well to heed them and think seriously about the instructions that we get from the Word. God bless you. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.